You might say, what is the propaganda theory? I've heard the term propaganda, and I somewhat understand that, but how does propaganda theory relate to communications? Excellent question. Here's what you need to recognize. The propaganda theory refers solely to the control of opinions by significant symbols, or to speak more concretely and less accurately, by stories, rumors, that's interesting, reports, pictures, and other forms of social communication. So what you need to recognize with the propaganda theory, it's the control of opinion. In the broadest sense, it is the technique of influencing human action and or behavior by the manipulation of representations in the media. All right, so we've talked about various aspects of the media. We said that in our last discussion, we talked about how the media tells us what's important. That's a different theory with agenda setting, the saliency of things. We've talked about the scientific method, how we can analyze the media. Now the propaganda theory says, you know what? I think that there is some validity in recognizing that we can actually impact human actions and human behaviors through the manipulation of what is done in the media. Absolutely fascinating. So buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. Now the propaganda theory goes really well hand in glove with what's called the magic bullet theory. Now, theorists have asserted that people are simply gullible and people believe lies. Now, let's stop on that for just a minute. I think there is some truth to that. Uh, that is why in America we have what is known as truth in advertising, because it has been brought out that some people were not necessarily completely honest. And so the government said, you know what, if you're going to advertise, you have to be honest. You cannot try to sell a potion that will cause somebody to grow 3 feet because they want to get into the NBA. All right, so let's go back to what we were saying. People are gullible and they do believe lies. So a message hits a target and will bring about a desired effect. That's the message of the communicator. The term magic bullet, then, is closely associated with the propaganda theory because you've got your bullet as the communicator and you've got a desired target, and if you communicate it well, then you have what's called the magic bullet. You have successfully communicated, you've hit your target audience. Just think a moment about infomercials. It's fascinating. You know, when are infomercials typically viewed? At 1 a.m. So it's being viewed maybe by an insomniac or by somebody who's got a late shift. And, you know, typically speaking, these people aren't necessarily out shopping for those items like a ShamWow. But they see it on TV and, oh, wow, this is awesome. This is excellent. This is going to save me so much time in my cleaning. And so the magic bullet of the communication hits the target, and those people pick up their phone or they jump on their email and their website and they order. Okay? Propaganda theory says that we as communicators can impact behavior. Now, here we go. In our field, we wish to be able to make generalizations about the way people communicate and the effects of the communication. So the magic bullet theory is going to assert, propaganda theory is going to assert, you can have a major impact on beliefs and actions through propaganda. Now, let's start off with an example of Orson Welles. Now, if you've never done any research or reading on Orson Welles and what he did with War of the Worlds back in 1938, you really need to do it. It's absolutely fascinating. Orson Welles, in 1938, was part of what was called Mercury Theater on the Air. Now, keep in mind, if you take yourself back historically, weren't televisions in homes, and so people would, on Saturday nights, gather around the radio, and the radio was really the form of entertainment back then. So the Mercury Theater would do quite extravagant productions, and you'd have stories told and different voices and sound effects. And Orson Welles had the idea, he was a young man back then, that he was going to take the author H.G. Wells, all right, so they're two different people. He was going to take the book written by H.G. Wells called War of the Worlds, and he was going to make an adaptation for the radio. And he did this live on the air on October 30th, so it was a Halloween production, and then it went ahead and aired. It was magnificently successful. So much so that people actually believed it. You had people stunned. You had people running from their homes. People absolutely terrified that there had been an alien invasion. H.G. Wells was soundly rebuked after the fact for what he had done. He was actually stunned. He said, I was only after entertainment. Now, that situation is often referred to when dealing with propaganda because our initial assertion that people are willing to believe lies. So here you had nothing more than sheer entertainment, but the listeners didn't even so much as turn the channel on their radio to see if it were true. Because if they had turned their channel, they would not have heard the exact same quote unquote news story going on all the other channels. Wells, though he was soundly rebuked for scaring people, certainly nailed down his place in history, though, as far as how he impacted society. Okay, so War of the Worlds was simply a radio adaptation of a book that people believed. And there were lessons to be learned from that. Scooting into World War II, there was a lady by the name of Edith Cavell. Now we're going to spend some time talking about war propaganda. So H.G. Wells was just entertainment, but people began to recognize, especially during war, that how they can communicate can impact the people back home. How can they present things? So Edith Cavell was a World War I nurse and humanitarian. Alrighty, so she actually she's going to be a tad before War of the Worlds, right? But everything from here for a couple of times is going to deal with war. So I think you'll be able to follow the progression here. Edith Cavell, my fault there. Actually, one of the things that she really sought to do as this nurse and humanitarian was she helped over 200 Allied soldiers who were being held in German-occupied Belgium. She assisted in their escape. She was almost, a precursor to Schindler, who helped Jews escape during World War II, correct? So Edith Cavell was a nurse. She was a very gracious, kind woman who was helping Allied soldiers escape. And the Germans came to find out about what she was doing, and they executed her. Well, those who were anti-German took up the case of Edith Cavell and really plastered it all over the newspapers. They began talking about her in publications. Now, you have to recognize that back in World War I, things weren't as rapid as they are now. Now, if anything happens, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, right? It is an immediate. Back then, it wasn't nearly so fast. So people really listened to the newspaper. They really took it to heart, really read it. So what happened? Well, there's the execution then. The Germans felt that she was a spy, and they killed her. And those who sided with Edith really took up her cause and represented her execution as an act of German barbarism and moral depravity. And they really just began pasting her picture everywhere in an attempt to stir up anti-German sentiment. Okay, remember, the goal of propaganda is to impact behavior, and part of behavior is our belief system and what we think to be right and wrong, good and bad. All right, so you will find propaganda really, really, really used throughout history and throughout wars. Let's move ahead a bit. We've got what was known as the corpse exploitation establishment. Now, this was actually done earlier on by one of the intelligence officers of the British Army by the name of General Charteris. Now, again, one of the premises of propaganda theory is that people will believe lies because they are gullible. Again, going back to early World War I and World War II, the information that went worldwide was much slower in its dissemination. Nowadays, if we see a picture and it has been photoshopped or it has been edited, we have an ability, to go online and check it out. And is that true? Was that really made up? Did they really catch that, creature? Such was not the case during World War I and World War II to the extent it is now. So you have this British Army officer, and again, his desire is to really make people dislike the Germans. So what did he do? He took these pictures. Now notice the picture on the left of your screen was a picture of horses that had fallen, and those horses were going to the glue factory. All right, they were going to use the horses. They were going to use the hooves and things like that in order to go ahead and create glue for the German armies and things. On the right side was a picture of German soldiers that were going to be going to burial. It was something that was sad for the Germans at the time, and they had the two pictures. So what did he do? He took those two pictures and he inverted the headlines. And now look what he's got. He presents these animals as the warriors, and that the Germans are going to bury their horses. Well, that's humane, that's kind. But then he switched it, and on the right side, instead of saying horses going to the glue factory, he said soldiers going to the glue factory. And immediately this stood out as just terribly inhumane. And I want to read you a clip of what was said about this. A detailed account of the corpse exploitation establishment appeared in the respected British newspaper, The Times. Now, back then, people believed their newspapers. People believed, that the newspaper was presenting truth. According to the story, trains full of corpses arrived at a large factory. The bodies were attached to hooks connected to an endless chain. And the article stated, quote, I'm reading what the article said, in 1917, the bodies are transported on this endless chain into a long, narrow compartment where they pass through a bath which disinfects them. They then go through a drying chamber. Now, let me stop for a minute. Remember that this is actually what is occurring in reality to the horses. But keep in mind that this intelligence officer switched it. So people are seeing pictures of soldiers on a cart, and they are believing that this article refers to those corpses, okay, not to the horses, to the dead soldiers. So again, the bodies are transported on this endless chain into a long, narrow compartment where they pass through a bath which disinfects them. They then go through a drying chamber and are finally automatically carried into a digester or a great cauldron, in which they are dropped by an apparatus which detaches them from the chain. In the digester, they remain from 6 to 8 hours and are treated by steam, which breaks them up while they are slowly stirred by the machinery. Again, the English people think that this is the process being used by the German government upon the dead German soldiers. The article continues. From this treatment result several products. The fats are broken up, a form of tallow and oils, which require to be redistilled before they can be used. The process of distillation is carried out by boiling the oil with carbonate of soda, and some of the byproducts resulting from this are used by German soap makers. The oil distillery and the refinery lie in the eastern corner of the works. The refined oil is then sent out in small casks like those used for petroleum and is of a yellowish brown color. Now, did you notice the meticulous detail that they used to explain the process by which the horses were sent into the glue factory? And this was actually, though, again, believed by the reader to be the corpses of the dead German soldiers. This stirred up great hatred and more anti-German sentiment during World War I because the British people were led to believe by this propaganda how horrific Hitler was, or I'm sorry, how horrific the Germans were to their own people. Fascinating. All right, so here's what I want you to know about World War II propaganda. A key player here was a man by the name of Cantrell. He was a social psychologist who studied the impact of media. Again, Cantrell was into World War II. So the nurse and the glue factory were World War I. Now we're going on into World War II. Cantrell received a phone call from a man by the name of Edward Filene. And Edward Filene said, we have got to finance how to teach people to think about war. Again, it was a great war. It was a horrific war. You had all kinds of nations involved, and there were those who were anti-World War II. They hadn't wanted to enter it. They were very concerned. They did not want to experience another world war. And so Edward Filene says, we have got to help the thought process. How can we do this? So what did these men determine? Cantrell really funded this. Filene funded this. And they decided that they couldn't teach people how to think, per se, but they might be able to teach them how not to think. So the Institute for Propaganda Analysis was formed. Cantrell was the first president, and the first key concern at the time was the rise of Nazis to power. So, again, they're going to help them what not to think. And these people said, we are going to help them learn to not like Hitler. That was their goal. We don't want the Americans to like Hitler. And they began a big propaganda. And notice they made sure that the propaganda was aimed at Hitler and not necessarily just the German people. Why? Well, because you had some Americans who had family over in Germany. And these two men said, look, we are not anti-German. We are anti the leadership under Hitler. So notice what they began making, what they began posting, what they began sending out. Notice this one, Hitler will send no warning. Always wear your gas mask. So they're certainly coupling fear with a sense of hatred. He's watching you. Who's the he? It's Hitler. Notice the picture in the right-hand corner. Very anti-Hitler. The other one at the bottom. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. They were trying to get people to carpool. Up in the upper right, our homes are in danger. Notice the picture of Hitler with the gun, and they were very, very anti-Hitler. So they recognized during World War II, and many, many, many other examples of propaganda during World War II. If you were to go forward even more, you'd see how propaganda was used during the Vietnam War, when they would just drop leaflets down and try to tell the people, we're here to help you. We want to help you. And because they couldn't necessarily get in and infiltrate on foot, so they were dropping leaflets all over. They were using propaganda to try to promote a pro-American approach in some of these other countries. At 9/11, we had those who would assert this. I'm sorry, I got one more slide before that. Within Germany during World War II, Hitler was obviously running his own propaganda. It was very anti-American. And he really targeted his youth, whereas in America at the time, we were targeting the adults and those who were at war, those who had children at war, things like that. Hitler, though, obviously was after the youth, and hence he started the Hitler Youth. And he was very effective. I am convinced that though Hitler was one of the most evil people who was ever alive during the World War II, I'm also convinced he must have been an absolute master communicator because he got an entire generation of youth, and it tends to be the youth who want to think and ponder and analyze. You know, that they're turning from being young teenagers on the cusp of being an adult, and they're really starting to think through things and process things. And Hitler wooed an entire generation. That's incredible to me. He was a master communicator. He communicated that which was wrong, and he was an evil man, but he was an effective communicator nonetheless. Now, moving forward to 9/11. There were those who, with their propaganda, after the horrific situation of 9/11, asserted via the media that Bush knew everything. And not only did he know everything, he actually had planned which tower would be struck, and he planted gasoline so that the towers would implode. Now, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I do not believe in any way Bush assisted the toppling of those towers. I believe that was a terrorist attack. But there were those who used the media to try to thwart Bush's leadership by asserting that he knew and he planned and he worked toward the ultimate implosion and falling of the Twin Towers. I would disagree with that. When it comes to propaganda theory devices, there are many, but I want you to think through these 5, okay? I've got 5. First of all is name calling. Name calling. That's where you try to give an idea a bad label. Right or wrong, you give a name or you give an idea a bad label. Now you see here a picture of the Ku Klux Klan. I think they were an awful group. I think they were wicked to the core. They were absolutely racist to the core. But they understood how to use propaganda. Why do I say that? Look at what they did at the bottom. They would call civil rights demonstrators communist-led black savages. Understand, America was anti-communist, right? The civil rights movement at the time was a movement simply trying to give rights to people who at the time did not have them. Okay? There were many, many, many good people involved in the civil rights movement. But the Ku Klux Klan labeled them as communist black savages. Took some very, very negative terms and placed them with the civil rights demonstrators. Thus, name calling can be very, very powerful. Again, I disagree with what they did. I think they were an awful group, but they understood the power of propaganda. Next, where you can give a glittering generality. A glittering generality. Now, a glittering generality is simply associating something with a virtue word, okay? If a vice is something bad, a virtue is really good. And it makes us accept and approve that item without even examining it, okay? So a glittering generality in propaganda is the use of a virtue word. What about Wonder Bread? Now, what makes Wonder Bread so wonderful? Obviously, that is just propaganda. That is very smart use of a name placement, correct? These people spend a lot of time determining the name of a new product. Why? So that when you're walking down the store and you think, what kind of white bread should I get for my children? Oh, I'll get the Wonder Bread. It's wonderful, right? Same with gold medal flour. Well, everybody wants to be a gold medal Olympian, right? As children, we maybe watched the Olympics and thought, I'm going to go win that gold medal someday, but few do. So give that virtue word there. How about United Airlines, and what do they say? They say fly the friendly skies. Like they're in control of the skies. But by saying a virtue word like friendly, perhaps we are prone to purchase a ticket from them. So that's a glittering generality. A transfer, you think if you transfer money from one bank account to the other, a transfer carries the authority and sanction and prestige of something that is respected and revered over something else in order to make item number 1 more acceptable. Okay, so transfer carries the authority and the sanction and the prestige of something respected and revered over another item in order to make the latter more acceptable. I'll give you an example here. Again, I go back to the Ku Klux Klan, a group that I think is awful. Okay, I don't want you to walk away from this thinking that I in any way respect what they did. I do not. Unfortunately, they took the symbol of the cross, which for us is very sacred. It's very honoring. It was the ultimate expression of God's love for us. And they burned it. Do you understand how then, look at this definition. They took the authority, the sanction, the prestige of something respected and revered, the cross, to try to make their racial hatred acceptable. That was a transfer. That's what propaganda theory would call a transfer. That was very cunning on their part, but what they did was very, very wrong. What about the Marlboro Man? Okay, same thing here. You know, the Marlboro Man, it's very interesting, through history really has not changed much. It's always the rugged, all-American cowboy. He's handsome, he's chiseled, he's obviously independent as he's out riding the range on his horse, right? So what are they selling? They're selling cigarettes. I am totally anti-cigarette. I don't smoke. I don't encourage people to smoke. But the Marlboro Company knew what they were doing when they used this rugged frontiersman as their main image, because they transferred the authority, the sanction, and the prestige of a manly man and tried to have that cause people to embrace cigarette smoking. Both of these are examples of bad transfer. But historically speaking, is the Marlboro Company very successful economically? Yes, sadly it is. And unfortunately, were the Ku Klux Klan successful in propagating their hate? They were. That was wrong. Both of these situations used transfer. Next, we've got testimonials. Testimonials, where you have a respected person or even a hated person give the idea that they really like a product. I was reading up on the Foreman grill, and it was not originally the Foreman grill, but somebody had created it, and George Foreman tried it, and the grill was not really selling all that much. And George Foreman liked it so much that he actually went back and bought the company, and he started labeling it with, you know, his testimony of how much he liked it, and the marketing went through the roof. Why? Because George Foreman. Now, what was George Foreman known for? Do you know? He was a boxer, a very, very famous boxer, and yet now he is successfully selling, grills. How about Michael Phelps? Right, an Olympian, much, hailed it as being an incredible athlete, whose testimony initially sold a lot of products, but then what happened? Then he was caught smoking some illegal substances, and you had some companies withdraw their use of him. Why? They said, you know what? You're no longer respected. Such is the case with, sadly, Tiger Woods right now, who made more in his, in his commercials than he ever did when he was doing all his professional golf. Did you know that? He definitely made more in that way. But you know what? Since the sad demise of his marriage and what has come out with the affairs, he has lost, I was looking this up today, he has lost Gatorade, Nike, and AT&T, and those just rather recently. But all of those said, you know what? You are no longer respected, you are no longer admired, therefore you're not the face that we want associated with our product. You're now associated with perhaps corruption and dishonesty, and we don't want that. The last one is the bandwagon in propaganda. Everybody's doing it. Start watching for commercials, crew. See if you can find where a testimonial is used. See if you can find when bandwagon is used. You know, why does McDonald's put on their golden arches how many are sold. I really don't need to know that 100 other million people are eating what I'm eating for dinner. But what does that say to us subconsciously? Hey, everybody's doing it. Everybody eats at McDonald's. It must be good. Let's go do it. So start watching as you view commercials, either online, on the web, on television, as you listen to radio. Are they using glittering generalities? Are they using name calling? Are they using transfers? Are they using bandwagons or testimonials? Start being wise to understanding that. Why is that? Now, you know what? The social media has a bandwagon, doesn't it? And listen, the propaganda theory is being used all over social media, right? Everybody's doing Facebook. You should do it. Everybody watches YouTube. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you behind the times? We have to be wise. Propaganda theory can accomplish ultimate goals that are good, right? We saw it happen in World War II, and we saw it happen in World War I when we're rallying the troops. But we have to be a critical thinker. We have to be wise. We have to say, is there truth behind this propaganda, or is it nothing more than someone attempting to have an impact on my behavior, right? So analyze, listen, understand what's going on. And that is the value of understanding the propaganda theory. That's it for today. Great job, crew. Have a good and godly day. For what lasting value is a good day if it's not also godly. We'll see ya.